In February of 1990, North America saw the release of Batman the video game on the Nintendo Entertainment System, an adaptation of the 1989 Batman film directed by Tim Burton. Honestly, when it comes to the NES as a whole, and its library of over 700 licensed games, I hate to say it, but less than half of those really hold up today, or ones you could easily pump multiple hours into. You have your classics, of course, like Mario, Zelda, Castlevania, Mega Man, Metroid, and the like, but the vast majority do show their age, and mechanically, graphically, however you want to put it, don't hold up well in today's gaming landscape. They won't give you as much mileage in terms of enjoyment. And when it comes to superhero games of this era, that number is even lower, because most of them are pretty forgettable, subpar, even downright shit, ones I don't recommend anyone ever play. There's no reason to. But sometimes there are exceptions, diamonds in the rough, and Batman the video game is one of them. In my honest opinion, it's the best superhero game from the third generation, really every generation of gaming leading up to it, making it really the first of its kind, the first to reach a level of greatness all the others before it failed to. Despite coming out over 30 years ago, I think Batman the video game holds up quite well. I might even consider it one of my favorite superhero games ever made. The story of Batman the video game loosely follows the events of the 1989 film, with the Joker waging an all-out war on the city of Gotham during its 200th anniversary celebrations. He has created a deadly nerve gas and has spread it throughout the city. It's up to Batman to stop him and put an end to the Joker's wave of crime and violence once and for all. Stage 1 has Batman fight his way through the city streets, outside the Monarch Theater where his parents were killed, culminating with a battle against Killer Moth, hired by the Joker to take out Batman on the steps of Gotham City Hall. Stage 2 takes place within Axis Chemicals, where Joker has been creating his nerve gas. Batman has to avoid leaking toxic waste and fast-moving conveyor belts. The boss at the end of this level is described in the game's manual as Machine Intelligence, a supercomputer of some kind housing various weapons that has 3 separate weak points Batman must destroy to progress. Stage 3 is in the Gotham City sewers and deeper in an underground cavern. The Electrocutioner, no relation to the one found in the comics, at least I don't think so, is the boss waiting for you at the end of this level. Stage 4 is set within a run-down laboratory that acts as the Joker's secret hideout. At the end, Batman must face off against the facility's alarm system, 2 square-shaped devices that fire laser blasts at you. And finally, Stage 5 takes place at the Gotham Cathedral, and as Batman climbs his way up to the top of the bell tower, once there, he must go up against the Joker's bodyguard, Firebug, who launches giant fireballs at Batman. When he is defeated, you then move on to the final showdown with the Joker, who is not only armed with his classic elongated pistol, but for some reason calls upon the power of the mighty thunder god Thor, and attacks Batman with several bolts of lightning. When the Joker is defeated, much like in the film, he falls to his death from the top of the bell tower. However, unlike in the film where Batman killed the Joker by proxy, attaching his leg to the gargoyle with a cable, and Joker essentially doing himself in by simply not letting go of the helicopter rope ladder, here, Batman just tells him that he knows the Joker is responsible for the death of his parents, and seeks vengeance, saying that he will be the one to dance with the devil in the pale moonlight, before hurling his archenemy right off the cathedral. Now, this is a very jarring moment to witness because after all, Batman doesn't kill, or at least in most stories he isn't supposed to, especially not in such a forceful way like he does here. The only way Batman could have looked worse in this moment is if he just pulled out a gun and shot Joker right in the fucking head, in point-blank range. Honestly though, I don't actually mind this ending to the game. For starters, this version of Batman, the one depicted in Tim Burton's movies, played by his own rules, did his own thing, and just because he killed doesn't mean the movies were any less entertaining. Michael Keaton's Dark Knight is still one of my favorite interpretations of the character, body count and all, and having Batman kill the Joker here does make a little bit of sense, or at least fits this version of the character more so than it would had the game been based off the Adam West Batman, or the one found in the Batman animated series, for example. The other reason I think the ending of this game works so well is because it's downright hilarious and makes me laugh my ass off each and every time I see it. It's so abrupt and out of the blue, and the fact that Batman uses the Joker's own cheesy "Dance with the Devil" line against him is the icing on the cake. And of course, watching the Joker plummet to his doom, that's kind of funny too, in a morbid way. The game's developer, Sunsoft, did as much as they could to make Batman the video game as accurate to the film as possible, for NES standards at least. They also tried to incorporate some elements from the comics as well, as many of the minor enemies are notable Batman villains, such as KG Beast, Deadshot, and Maxi Zeus, according to the game's instruction manual, that is. Out of them all, the only one that looks anything like his comic book counterpart is Killer Moth. I feel Sunsoft was kind of lazy naming these characters, and slapped Batman villain names onto them just because they could. It doesn't mean they are actually supposed to be those characters or anything. Anywho, Batman the video game is a side-scrolling platformer that has you traverse its levels using a Ninja Gaiden-inspired wall jump. This wall jump is very addictive and satisfying to use, and by the end of the game, you really have to master it because the jumps do become rather difficult. You have to time your button presses accurately to avoid taking damage. Some of the jumps, I honestly don't know how to get past them without taking damage. As Batman, you can take out enemies in a variety of ways. You can use your fists, of course, but you also have access to several gadgets. Batman has his iconic batarangs that fire straight out in front of him, with limited range. Shurikens that spread out in 3 different directions, affecting a wider area, and a spear gun that covers a greater distance than the batarangs do. Each one costs a certain amount of ammo to use, which are in the form of pellet cartridges Batman can pick up after defeating enemies. I would easily consider Batman on NES to be one of the hardest video games I have ever played, and I think it may be one of the hardest superhero games for that matter too. The only one I can think of that is more challenging would be Silver Surfer on the NES, which might actually be one of the hardest video games of all time, if you really think about it, and man, is that fucking sad to admit. The main reason I would put Batman on NES up there is because of that final battle with the Joker. It is really difficult, rage-inducing at times. You have to hit him a lot to put him down, and by that point in the level, you're bled white in terms of gadget ammo, so hitting him is easier said than done. The game gives you unlimited continues by default, which is nice, but once you lose all your lives, you do still have to start each level from the very beginning, which can be frustrating. That final level leading up to the Joker has the hardest platforming bar none. The best way for me to play this game, the way I enjoy it the most, is by playing with a few Game Genie codes. The two being unlimited lives, which eliminates the frustration of starting an entire stage from the beginning, even if you die on a boss, and the other, which gives you double the amount of pellets for each pickup, which essentially means you never run out of gadget ammo, or at least have way more than enough to deal with each boss, even the Joker, by the time you get to him. Playing with these codes may be cheating, but it makes the game far more tolerable and enjoyable for me, so at the end of the day, I don't really care. Batman the video game is one of my favorites on the NES, and when it comes to superhero titles from the first 3 generations of video gaming, I think it takes the award for being the very best, because prior to it, they had ranged in quality a great deal. Many of them are quite forgettable and not worth your time. It may be rather old and outdated, and suffers from a few flaws, mainly with its difficulty, but Batman on NES still holds up rather strongly. I can pop it into my console on any day of the week and still have a blast playing it. I think it's a fairly strong adaptation of the 1989 Batman film, and follows the movie about as well as it could have, given the limitations of the NES hardware. I think the Sega Genesis version of Batman the video game was a bit stronger than this game was in terms of film accuracy, but that's a review for another day. This has been NerdGasm. I want to thank you all for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon to be notified of all future content I release on here. You can also help support the production of these videos by becoming a patron for my channel over on patreon.com. If you've played Batman on NES before, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Does it still hold up? Do you think it's a piece of crap? Let me know in the comments below. I will see you all in the next video. Take care and stay nerdy. How's it going, everyone? It's NerdGasm. Last week, I took a look at the video game adaptation of the 1989 Batman film on the NES, one of my favorite titles for that console, and what I consider to be the very best superhero game of that generation. This time, I wanted to review its updated counterpart, released for the Sega Genesis in July of 1991, a year after the NES game came out, and 2 years after the release of the film. While it may be an enhanced version of the NES game, with better graphics on stronger hardware, I don't know if it's necessarily superior, for reasons I will get into. Just like the NES version of the game, Batman on Sega Genesis loosely follows the events of the movie. Gotham is celebrating its 200th anniversary, and a new villain, known as the Joker, begins terrorizing the city, with Batman being the only one capable of stopping him. The Sega Genesis version of Batman the video game is far more accurate to its source material than the NES game was. For starters, the levels feature a lot more environments found within the film. Not only does it have the Gotham streets, Axis chemicals, and the cathedral at the end, but it also has the Flugelheim Museum, which was not in the NES game. In the Axis chemicals level, you also end up knocking Jack Napier into the vat of chemicals that transform him into the Joker, so the villain actually gets an origin this time around. Vicky Vale is also present in the Sega Genesis version of the game. The Joker kidnaps her in order to set a trap for Batman. Apart from a brief description of her in the opening cutscene on the NES, that's all we saw of her. She wasn't mentioned anymore for the remainder of the game. And finally, there are 2 vehicle stages in Batman on Sega Genesis, one having you drive the Batmobile, based on the scene from the movie when Joker's goons chase Batman following his rescue of Vicky Vale at the museum, and the other where you pilot the Batwing to destroy all of Joker's helicopters and balloons that are dispersing his toxic Smilex gas. The only element from the film I really wish was featured in this game that wasn't even in the NES version is Bob the Goon. I really wish he had a cameo of some kind. Hell, even a boss battle would have been really cool. We get to fight the sword-wielding Joker Goon Batman fights in the movie, even the bald guy holding the boombox named Lawrence, twice, once in the Flugelheim Museum and at the end of the game in the boss rush in the cathedral. I get that Bob was dead by the time the cathedral sequence happens in the film, but why not place him in as the first boss or something in the city streets, instead of some random guy in boxing gloves, which, by the way, you also face twice. And that's something I find really disappointing about this game, the boss battles. All of them are just your standard bad guys with specific weapon gimmicks. Swords, boxing gloves, boomboxes, what have you. They should have incorporated Bob the Goon, or even do what the NES game did and have some villains from the comics make an appearance, like Killer Moth or even Firebug. This game essentially followed the movie too accurately, not giving itself any leeway for new ideas. Gameplay-wise, I also think Batman on Sega Genesis suffers in comparison to its NES counterpart. It's not terrible by any means, just not as enjoyable as that game was to play. Batman on Sega Genesis, much like the one on NES, is a side-scrolling platformer. You can take out enemies using fisticuffs, or even batarangs you can throw that do extra damage, but there aren't as many ways to defeat enemies as there were in the NES game, not as much variety. The awesome wall jump, easily the strongest aspect of the NES game in terms of gameplay, has also been removed, and in its place, Batman now has a grappling hook that allows him to climb up to platforms that are above him. You will be using this gadget a lot throughout the game, as it's needed to progress further in many of the levels, especially the cathedral that has you climbing higher and higher to reach the top. While the combat can be fun in areas and the addition of the grappling hook is pretty cool in a few of the levels when it's used, this game just doesn't have as much variety as the NES game does in terms of gameplay, and I feel it gets far more repetitive by the end. It's not terrible, I can't stress that enough, but it's also far from amazing. It's not as fun to play as the NES game is, at least in my opinion. Batman on Sega Genesis is also really easy, like super easy. You don't need any cheats to beat it because it doesn't offer much of a challenge. You'll die a few times here and there, maybe even have to use a continue once or twice, but compared to the first game, this one is a walk in the park. The only real areas of frustration would be those driving stages, because the other vehicles do so much damage to you, and you can lose several lives within a matter of seconds if you're not careful. As long as you try to stay in the top left of the screen though, dodging only when you have to, then you should be fine. The jumping can also be a bit finicky in areas, because Batman does have a double jump in this game. Unlike many platformers though, where you press the jump button again at the height of your jump to jump mid-air a second time, here you have to double tap the button immediately, and just aim where you land, which can be kind of awkward. The final boss battle against the Joker can be tough, but nowhere near as difficult as he was in the NES version. His attacks are a lot slower, much easier to dodge and anticipate, and he doesn't have as many hit points either. You can even spam your batarangs at him if you want to. They do massive amounts of damage, so you never even have to get in close with him. So yeah, this game is much easier than the NES version of it is. All in all, I still enjoy Batman the video game on Sega Genesis. It's based off one of my favorite Batman films, and is pretty accurate to its source material, more so than the NES game was. Visually, it's a lot better than the NES version as well, but sometimes graphics don't always make a game, because when it comes to the gameplay, I don't find this version of Batman to be better. I think it gets more repetitive, a bit more stale by the end, and it's far too easy. They should have balanced it a lot more in terms of difficulty. I also would have loved to see a greater variety with its boss battles, because so many of them feel very stock. I would have loved to see Bob the Goon, or any classic villains from the comics that weren't featured in the movie. That would have been really cool and would help break up some of the monotony with everything. I still enjoy Batman on Sega Genesis. It's not a bad superhero game by any means. It's still a lot of fun to play, even to this day. Its graphics have a certain charm to them, its soundtrack is pretty kick-ass, and even though it is really easy, that makes it far more accessible for gamers of all ages, more so than the NES game was in my opinion. I would still recommend you play this game if you haven't already, because it does offer some enjoyment. It's a decent Batman experience, even though I do prefer the NES version over it. And that concludes my review of Batman on Sega Genesis. Let me know what you think of the game in the comment section down below, and if you have played it before. I want to thank everyone for watching this video. Hopefully you were entertained and got something out of it. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel to help support my content, and I will see you all in the next one. Take care. So far on my channel, I've looked at 2 of the video games based on Tim Burton's Batman from 1989. The first, on NES, was released in North America in 1990, and, in my honest opinion, remains one of the greatest superhero games ever made. Definitely one of the strongest to come out of the 3rd generation. Its satisfying Ninja Gaiden-inspired wall jump mechanic set it apart from a lot of other side-scrolling platformers at the time. While the version of the game on Sega Genesis was inferior to the one on NES, it wasn't without its merits. It made a greater attempt to adapt the events of the film, and made use of Batman's grapnel gun with its platforming. The 3rd and final game based on the 1989 movie I want to look at is the one released for arcades in 1990. It was developed by New Mega Team and published by Atari Games, and was the first ever arcade game based on the Batman character. It's mainly a side-scrolling beat-em-up and platformer, but does make use of a few first-person driving stages as well. The combat is very limited, with Batman's punches and kicks, changing depending on how long you press the attack button down, or if you double tap it, for example. The platforming can be kind of stiff as well. Holding the jump button down increases the height of your jump, but jumping over large gaps, needing to build up that momentum, can sometimes feel awkward if you aren't 100% accurate with it. Much like the Sega Genesis game, Batman the Arcade does its best to follow the events of the film, and features many of the same locations from it, like Access Chemicals, the Flugelheim Museum, and of course, Gotham Cathedral. It's far more accurate to the movie than the NES game was, that took quite a bit of liberties with its source material. The Dark Knight learns that Access Chemicals is being cleaned out by gangster Jack Napier. You drive the Batmobile, armed with its mounted guns, and take out several cars being driven by his men, on your way to the factory. I love the first-person perspective in these Batmobile levels, the interior view you get of all the dials, flashing lights, and even GPS. It really does feel like you are driving the iconic car. When you reach Access Chemicals, you have to jump across various catwalks and moving platforms, avoid falling into vats of acid, and end up confronting Napier, punching him into a giant vat of chemicals, and turning him into the Joker. The animation for it is awesome. The evil clown would go after photographer Vicky Vale, and you're forced to save her at the museum. You dodge floating balloons and Joker jack-in-the-boxes that shoot at you. Some of Joker's men even tear through paintings on the walls. I guess they were hiding behind them, within hidden compartments? Really weird. After another Batmobile section, this time against Joker's thugs in their purple and green cars, Batman finds himself outside Gotham City Hall. The Joker has spray-painted a message, "Can't catch me," with arrows pointing upwards which you follow, climbing up the sides of various buildings and fire escapes, before being led back down to street level, in front of the Monarch Theater, where Bruce Wayne's parents had been murdered all those years ago. Is this the game's attempt at telling the player Joker was the one responsible for killing them, like in the movie? Maybe. Once you take out that goon with the dual katanas hanging around near the Batmobile, you get to pilot the Batwing during Gotham's 200th anniversary parade. You have to not only shoot down the Joker's helicopters, but also catch as many of his Smilex-filled balloons as you can, with the clamps at the front of the Batwing, something I didn't even notice when I was capturing the footage, hence why I missed a few. I apologize. You then make your way up the cathedral, its many stairs and platforms. There's this cool section with you dodging several bells the Joker dislodges. How many can one church have? You then battle the villain, Mono e Mono. He throws chattering teeth at you, and shoots at you with his acid-squirting flower and long-barreled revolver that he had used to shoot down the Batwing earlier. You knock Joker off the tower, avenging the death of your parents. His arms, coattails, and tie all flail in the air, and you see the GCPD officers stand over his body when he makes impact. Gotham is safe for another day. Batman the Arcade game is a pretty decent experience. I think the game does a solid job adapting the events of the film. It might be the most accurate out of all the video games released based on Batman '89 as a matter of fact. The main combat and platforming sections aren't anything to really sneeze at. Even back then, when the game first came out, I don't think its gameplay would have been all that impressive compared to some of the other games in the arcades and on home consoles. But the first-person vehicle stages are definitely a standout. If there was one reason to play this game, it'd be for the driving stages. They're a lot of fun, provide an interesting perspective, and are fairly immersive. The graphics in Batman the Arcade game are pretty good, for the time at least. They're very colorful and pleasing to the eye. Some of the animations are a bit goofy looking, but overall, the presentation is excellent. The music is nice, and the voice clips taken from the movie help add to some of the notable story events that happen. I think the only real downside to this game is its short length. It only clocks in at around 15 to 20 minutes. That's it. I think if it were longer, it would have been an even stronger adaptation of the film. It would have been able to feature even more moments, more locations. But as is, it's still pretty good. I'm not complaining too much. I want to thank you all for watching my quick little review of the Batman arcade game. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to show your support to the channel and ensure its future, you can do so by subscribing, hitting that bell icon for notifications, sharing my content to anyone you feel might enjoy it, and by becoming a producer over on patreon.com if you can. I will see you all in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and always stay nerdy. There were many video game adaptations of Batman Returns released in the early 1990s, and out of all of those made for home consoles, the one for the Nintendo Entertainment System, NES, definitely got the least amount of attention and exposure. Its release was sandwiched and overshadowed by the more impressive versions of the game for the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, and Sega CD. While I find it to be the weakest of all the console versions, Batman Returns on NES isn't without its merits. I think it's a solid game, a suitable follow-up to its predecessor on the same console, and one of the better superhero games to come out of the third generation, which was a vast wasteland of mediocrity when it comes to the superhero genre. Unlike the original Batman movie game that was a side-scrolling platformer that implemented the use of a Ninja Gaiden-inspired wall jump, Batman Returns takes a different approach and emulates the beat-em-up gameplay found in titles such as Double Dragon. You can punch, kick, and slide into your enemies within a very primitive-looking 2.5D area. Gadgets, such as the Batarang, are available to damage enemies from a distance, and occasionally, Batman will use his grapnel gun to climb up buildings, or you can use it to break open objects for extra health. Enemies are in the form of various members of the Red Triangle Circus Gang, led by Oswald Cobblepot, the Penguin. There's a decent variety to them, and I like how all of them are given their own unique colors to help them stand apart. Batman Returns on NES only takes around 30 to 45 minutes to finish. While it can be fun, its beat-em-up style does drag in areas, and can get rather exhausting simply because it's not as layered as other games in the genre, even ones released around this same time. There just aren't enough moves in it to keep you fully engaged throughout. The area you fight in seems unnecessarily large, the enemy numbers are high, and your attacks don't always feel very powerful. Thankfully, though, the visuals and story do make up for it all a little. Going into the story of this game, it obviously follows that of the movie, and I think it does a decent job with some colorful and appealing cinematics, when cinematics were basically just slideshows. It opens up with Max Shreck's speech at the tree lighting ceremony in Gotham Plaza, which erupts into chaos following the arrival of the deadly Red Triangle Circus Gang. Batman is notified of the attack via the bat signal, and the game says Batman is returning to Gotham, as if he just disappeared from the city following the Joker's defeat, like he completely fucking bailed on them or something. Stage 1 has you fighting through the streets of Gotham on your way to the plaza. You take on the circus strongman who throws a barrel at you and spins his arms around. I like the flashing of the Christmas tree and its star in the background. Stage 2 is set at Shrek's department store. The first section has you outside of it, and when you reach the main entrance, Catwoman arrives and threatens to blow it up out of revenge. You make your way through the store to stop her. I love the checkered tiles on the floor and the creepy cat faces on the walls behind you. Some of the mannequins come to life, revealing themselves to be members of the circus gang, which is cool. There's also a part where you have to avoid electrified water by jumping across platforms and safely navigate around dropped bombs from RC choppers that destroy parts of the floor. You eventually reach the department store's rooftop and fight Catwoman. Batman's sprite in this game isn't perfect by any means, but passable for NES standards. I think Catwoman's is utter shit though. Konami could have at least colored her chin white like Batman's. I hate how she's all blue. After defeating Catwoman, she forms an alliance with the Penguin, and the two plan to set a trap for the Dark Knight. Stage 3 has you go after the Ice Princess, who had been kidnapped by the villains. You start off in the streets of Gotham again, and can see posters on buildings promoting Penguin's run for mayor. You reach Penguin's office building, and Batman stands outside of his door, hearing a conversation between Oswald and Max Schreck, referring to the citizens of Gotham as squealing, wretched, and pinheaded. Penguin also says he has played the city like a harp, but not one from hell. This is a kid's game after all. The way Batman learns of this deception and records it is different from what was in the film, but I like what the game did here. You would continue onwards in your pursuit of the Ice Princess on Gotham's rooftops. The following section would have Batman slowly sliding off the roof at all times, so you need to keep moving while battling enemies. There are even the motorcyclists up there too, which is nuts. How are they not sliding? Winter tires, I assume. When you reach the Ice Princess, you guessed it, she's knocked off the building to her death, frightened by bats. Penguin blames Batman for her death, and the next day delivers a speech calling him a menace to the city. However, Batman would interrupt it and play the recorded conversation from earlier for the crowd to hear. Angered, they proceed to pelt Penguin with several types of vegetables they just so happened to have on them. Maybe there was a sale at the grocery store? I don't know. I wondered where they got them all in the movie too. The next stage, Stage 4, begins with a side-scrolling driving section, where you are going after the circus train, abducting all of the firstborn children in Gotham with the Batmobile. It's a pretty neat sequence that has the Batmobile break apart into its thinner form, as shown in the film, following that chase with the police. You end up catching up to the train and trade blows with a bunch of Penguin circus goons alongside it. The stage culminates with a battle against the organ grinder, minus his monkey. I also hate how you can see all of the kids moving in their cages, reaching out for Batman's help. It's fucking sad. Anyways, the fifth stage of the game has Batman go after Penguin and his remote control, in the hopes of disabling his Penguin army he has sent to attack the city. You take him on in his duck vehicle that raises, lowers, and shifts from side to side. You then do another driving stage in the sewers with the Bat ski boat. Not much to really say about this one. You zigzag to collect silver icons, that's it. But the speed of the water, everything moving past, it's so fast, it kinda hurts the eyes after a while. And finally, Stage 6 takes you to Arctic World for a final showdown with the Penguin. You have to fight his remaining circus gang members on ice that causes you to slide around. It takes longer to defeat the enemies, their health bars are larger, and really test your patience this late in the game. The final boss battle against Penguin is alright. He flies around with his umbrella and drops bombs on you. His health meter goes from purple to orange and then green as you damage him. When it's drained completely, he slowly walks to the center of the screen before collapsing. Nothing special. Catwoman really feels like an afterthought in this version of the game. So yeah, all in all, Batman Returns on the NES is a fun yet flawed game. I think it's a decent adaptation of the 1992 film, even though the gameplay does get incredibly repetitive and tiresome in it. Considering how shitty so many of the superhero games were coming out of this era of gaming though, I'm just impressed it's as good as it is. I couldn't ask for anything more of it. If you've played it, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Batman Returns for the NES down in the comments section below. I hope you enjoyed watching this video and found it entertaining or insightful in some way. That's always what I aim for with these. If you'd like to help ensure the future of this channel and its content, you can do so by subscribing, hitting that bell icon to be notified of updates and new videos I release, and by becoming a producer over on patreon.com if you can, for as little as $1 per month. I will see you all in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and always stay nerdy. Hello everybody, it's NerdGasm. I am really excited because today I will be reviewing one of my all-time favorite superhero games, based off one of my all-time favorite superhero movies, Batman Returns. Out of all the official video game adaptations of the original Warner Bros. Batman films that I have looked at on this channel, Batman Returns for the Super Nintendo is easily the best, in my opinion. It nails the overall tone and atmosphere of its big screen counterpart, a lot stronger than any of the other games I have reviewed. From merely a gameplay perspective alone, it is superior, because it is the most enjoyable to play, the most fun to sit through, and if I were to be completely honest, it is aged the best, like fine wine, and I would put it side by side with some of the greatest Batman games ever made. That may be a bold statement, I know, for a game that's nearly 30 years old, and I realize a lot of my nostalgia is playing a large factor into it, but I would still rank Batman Returns for the SNES up there as being one of my favorite Batman games, probably in my top 5. Batman Returns, like a lot of superhero games released around that time, is a side-scrolling beat-em-up, with you, as the player, having to clear each screen and defeat every enemy you encounter in order to progress through its 7 levels. As Batman, you can pummel enemies with your fists, stun them with your batarangs, chokeslam them into the ground, knock their heads together, or even throw them into store windows, which is a lot of fun. The awesome sound effects, flashy combat animations, all of it comes together to make this game very satisfying and addictive to play. Not only do you have the beat-em-up sections to contend with, but sometimes the game gets you to use a few of Batman's gadgets like the grapnel gun to latch onto the ceiling and avoid hazards, or swing your way to other platforms. There is also a level featuring the Batmobile that utilizes a more 3D style with its visuals, which provides a very interesting and unique perspective to everything. The visuals in Batman Returns are great, and the graphical style of the Super Nintendo complements a game like this wonderfully. The Gothic-inspired architecture of Gotham found within these Tim Burton movies, the snow you can see settling on the city streets, the Christmas trees in the background, the Penguin's mayoral posters hung up on buildings, all of it just has so much color and vibrancy to it. One thing Batman Returns is not is an ugly game. The story of Batman Returns follows the events of the 1992 film fairly accurately. It begins with the bat signal shining into the study of Wayne Manor, and Batman racing off to the source of the disturbance. The Dark Knight finds himself facing off with the Red Triangle Circus Gang, led by the vile Penguin, who has allied himself with businessman Max Schreck in an attempt to destroy the current mayor's reputation and swoop in to become the new mayor himself. Stage 1 is set within Gotham Plaza and has Batman fight his way past various storefronts to reach the Christmas tree lighting ceremony that has begun. At the end of the level, you rescue Max Schreck's secretary, Selina Kyle, who is being held hostage by the stun gun clown seen in the movie. There isn't much done with Selina in this game, in terms of how she becomes Catwoman. It's quite abrupt and relies on you having seen the film, but that's not something I'm going to really bash it for. With Penguin's mayoral campaign in full swing, Batman moves on to the city streets in Stage 2. There is also a section taking place within Max Schreck's department store, which begins to catch fire as you are moving through it, caused by Catwoman, which you find out shortly afterwards. The boss at the end of this level is the Circus Strongman, the one Batman kills in the movie after strapping that bomb to his stomach and punching him down that hole. Following the destruction of Shrek's department store, Batman tails a mysterious female figure to the rooftops. It's here where you battle Catwoman for the first time, and to be perfectly honest, no matter how many times I play this game, she always gives me a hassle. I think she's harder than the final battle with Penguin, just because she has that whip that she can hit you with from a distance, and she moves around so fast, using this hard-to-predict dashing attack. I hate it so much. After being defeated by Batman, Catwoman allies herself with the Penguin, and they plan on setting a trap for the Dark Knight in an abandoned building. The duo kidnap the Ice Princess, and it's here where you fight Catwoman again, this time in a darkened area where she blends in with the background. Fun stuff. Afterwards, the Ice Princess is moved to the rooftop, and Batman comes face to face with the Penguin for the first time in this game. You fight him as he rides around on his helicopter umbrella, throwing even more of them at you that explode. How does he carry so much? Anyways, once he is defeated, he throws one of his umbrellas like a long dart, which contains several bats that startle the Ice Princess, making her fall off the building. The citizens of Gotham see Batman looking down from the rooftop, and he is blamed for her death, just like in the movie. Stage 5 is the Batmobile section that has you gun down several of Penguin's biker goons. It's a short level that does end up becoming rather repetitive, unfortunately, but does have you take out the Penguin's campaign van, putting an end to his dreams of becoming the mayor of Gotham. With his campaign for mayor over, the Penguin initiates Phase 2 of his scheme to kidnap all the firstborn children of Gotham and drown them in the sewers within his lair. It's a fucked up concept and was one of the main reasons the Batman Returns film suffered so much backlash when it came out. Anyways, Stage 6 takes place on top of the circus train the Penguin's men are using to transport all of the children. In order to stop it, Batman must reach the first car of the train, and then do battle with the organ grinder, and his monkey jumping up and down in the background. You want to try and stay close to this guy when you fight him, because the barrel organ he uses as a melee weapon also contains a machine gun inside of it. And finally, Stage 7 has Batman go to the Penguin's lair in Arctic World, at the old abandoned Gotham Zoo, for one final face-off. Though the game doesn't touch on the Penguin's third plan of bombing Gotham using his army of penguins, like in the film, they can be seen in the background and foreground of this level, which is pretty cool, and they also launch missiles at Batman that you will need to try and avoid. You battle Penguin 2 more times in this level, once while he is driving his duck vehicle, with more of his penguins sitting in the back firing missiles at you, and the other within his actual lair itself. This fight is similar to the one you had with him back on the rooftop, but now he moves much faster, like Catwoman did in her boss encounters, and will also get off of his helicopter umbrella at certain points, clinging onto you like some sort of short, fat spider monkey. It's annoying. So yeah, taking it all in, Batman Returns on SNES is a pretty solid adaptation of the film. It is omitting a few ideas like Catwoman's origin, the Penguin army attempting to bomb Gotham City, and the Batmobile being controlled remotely by the Penguin to discredit Batman even further following the death of the Ice Princess. But these elements are unnecessary in the grand scheme of things. I'm just nitpicking here for the sake of nitpicking. I know I say this a lot about many of the games I look at on my channel, but Batman Returns on Super Nintendo is one of my favorite superhero games. I would definitely say it's in my top 5, especially in terms of Batman. I think as movie licensed games go, in the superhero genre, it's probably the best there has ever been, in my opinion. I think its visuals are superb, the gameplay is very fun and addictive, and how it adapts the film it's based on, that's done in a well-rounded and respectable manner as well. Even though it is a beat-em-up and these kinds of games can become rather repetitive at times, I feel Batman Returns injects enough variety into it that it doesn't become too stale. Some sequences have you focus on combat, some limit you to just using batarangs, some have you swing over obstacles with the grapnel gun, and one even has you driving the Batmobile. The boss battles also feel unique as well, even the ones that have you face the same villain multiple times, because their attack animations vary, or the environment you face them in changes, adding more difficulty to the whole thing. I highly recommend Batman Returns to anyone who is not only a fan of Batman, but beat-em-up games in general. I have a blast with this title each and every time I play it, and I think it holds up a lot stronger than many of its other retro 2D era superhero contemporaries do. Batman Returns is my all-time favorite game on the SNES, and I fall in love with it the more times I play it. I can't seem to get enough. This has been NerdGasm. I want to thank everyone for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed my review of Batman Returns. If you've played it, let me know what you think of the game in the comment section down below. Please subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon to be notified of all future content I release, and if you can, help support the production of videos like these over on patreon.com. Any bit helps. I will see you all in the next video. Take care and stay nerdy. Batman Returns on the Super Nintendo has always been one of my favorite superhero games, one I try to revisit every year or so. I gushed over it when I reviewed the game several years ago on my channel, but something I have not done is show my admiration for its Sega-released counterpart, because it too kicks some serious butt, even after all these decades and console generations. The visuals of Batman Returns on the SNES are very colorful and vibrant for the most part, whereas the version released on the Sega Genesis and the Sega CD is very gloomy and atmospheric, a better representation of the darker and more graphic moments from the live-action film. Batman Returns on the Sega Genesis and Sega CD were developed by Malibu Interactive and act as a direct sequel to Sunsoft's Batman game that had been released the year prior, based on the original 1989 film. Despite being from a different developer, Batman Returns still feels like a natural continuation of Sunsoft's title in terms of gameplay. It focuses heavily on platforming, using Batman's grapnel gun, but this time around, it's implemented much better in my opinion. You can not only use it to pull yourself up to higher ledges, but also swing across gaps. I love the animations given to Batman when he's scaling rooftops, walking up the steep slopes, or sliding down them. The combat animations in this game feel a lot smoother than in the original, and you have access to a few more gadgets to help damage enemies, like smoke bombs, homing batarangs, and a powerful Bat Swarm ability. The selection for them is in the form of a utility belt that pops up at the bottom of the screen, which is pretty neat. At times, the control can be a little unresponsive in this game, and the hit detection isn't perfect, making it quite difficult, far more challenging than the first game was. But honestly, I prefer playing this one over the Sunsoft original. It just has more layers to it gameplay-wise, and I think overall, it's aged much better too, especially if you have a Game Genie with you to help alleviate some of the pressure. Both the Sega Genesis and Sega CD versions of Batman Returns are more or less the same. However, the Sega CD one was released later, in May of 1993, and would feature improved music and additional levels with the Batmobile and Bat Ski Boat, as seen in the film, making use of the Sega CD's stronger graphics hardware. The cutscenes at the beginning of these driving sections, as well as the levels themselves, showed off some really impressive and badass graphics for the time. Honestly, they still look amazing even to this day. Batman Returns on the Sega CD is the definitive way to play the Sega version of the game, in my opinion. I think having the driving sections sprinkled in throughout the game provides a lot more variety than just having the platforming levels alone. The driving stages do get repetitive though. All you're doing in them is driving forward, dodging obstacles, and destroying a set number of enemies within a time limit. While it's nice having them as a bonus, they are just supplemental at the end of the day. The meat and potatoes of the game, when you're having the most fun, is when you're playing as Batman. What's interesting about Batman Returns on Sega, and something that sets it apart from the other versions of the game I have looked at on the channel, is that its story starts much later in the film, immediately following the death of the Ice Princess at the hands of the Penguin, with Gotham citizens believing Batman is responsible. Unfortunately, there aren't any other cutscenes in the game after that, not even text boxes during the levels, so you don't have a lot of context behind what you are doing, unless of course you have seen the film it's based on. But even if you have, the game takes several liberties with the source material. As an adaptation, it's far less accurate than the versions of Batman Returns on the NES and Super NES were. The game, assuming you are playing the one on Sega CD, begins with a driving stage, having you race through the streets of Gotham in the Batmobile and deal with armed vehicles being driven by members of Penguin's Red Triangle Circus Gang. Batman then scales the rooftops of Gotham City and encounters and defeats Catwoman for the first time. On street level, the Dark Knight is attacked by two Gotham statues pulling levers and shooting fireballs from their mouths, which is a stretch. The statues were seen in the movie, but I'd like to know who turned them into harbingers of death. Why are they trying to kill you? Is it the citizens getting revenge on Batman for killing the Ice Princess? Who knows? After destroying the statues, you make your way into a nearby church and have to climb its many floors, culminating with a fight against the Penguin in the Bell Tower. A church was not used as a location in Batman Returns. There was a cathedral in the 1989 film, but I don't know why they went with a church again here. The second of three Batmobile stages is called Winter Wonderland, where you can see circus tents and Ferris wheels on the horizon. The following level is at Shrek's department store. You take on the circus strongman out front before entering the building. You climb up various floors, even sliding down some escalators, and then battle Catwoman again, and the Penguin, this time throwing deadly buzzsaws at you. Another Batmobile stage happens, placing you back in the city with the Bat Signal and Wayne Manor visible in the distance. I feel like this Batmobile section and the previous one should have been switched around though, because the following level is at the Red Triangle Circus, and it would have made more sense to have Batman traveling in that direction, towards the circus beforehand. I kind of like how this game has you go to the actual circus itself though, which I would assume is abandoned. You see where all of these deranged criminals came from. It's one of the more memorable locations in this game, with a lot of interesting and creepy visuals. The circus stage ends on top of the train from the movie, filled with the kidnapped children, so I guess in the game they had taken them to the circus instead of the direction of Penguin's lair. I think that's even spookier. After stopping the train, you drive through the sewer tunnels of Gotham in the Bat ski boat on your way to Penguin's lair. All you really do in this sequence is go off jumps and dodge various hazards, some of them moving. I prefer the Batmobile levels over the lone Bat ski boat one, because the water effects can get a bit nauseating after a while. The final stages of the game have you traverse the massive sewer system beneath Gotham, a confusing maze of twisting pipes. You fight Penguin, who shoots at you with his sewage gun, before fleeing to the inner depths of his lair, that's filled with ice-covered platforms. There's a narrow tunnel you go through, riding on several ice blocks. You have to time your jumps perfectly with the grapnel gun, or you will hit the low ceiling and fall into the water. It's pretty tricky. I died a lot. The final boss is obviously against Penguin. You damage his duck vehicle and then fight him wearing his scuzzy jammies. You destroy his signal relay and then he slumps over and slides into the water. It looks pretty funny. The strengths of Batman Returns on Sega lie within its dark atmosphere and visuals. The presentation in it is just stellar. I also enjoy the improvements made to the gameplay from what was found in the original game from Sunsoft. It's held back a little, though, by the lack of story context it gives, and the bizarre liberties it takes with the events of the film in areas. While I do enjoy playing Batman Returns on Sega, the one on SNES is still the superior version in my opinion. It has far more replay value and is much easier too. I want to thank you all for watching my review of Batman Returns on Sega Genesis and Sega CD. If you've played either of them or both, let me know your thoughts on them in the comments section below. If you enjoyed the video, think about supporting the channel by subscribing, hitting that bell icon for notifications, and by becoming a producer over on patreon.com if you can. I will see you all in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and always stay nerdy. When you think of the worst Batman games ever made, 1995's Batman Forever for the Super Nintendo is usually one of the titles that finds itself on that list. It's got a lot of issues, which I will get into, but I have to admit, having played the 1998 Batman and Robin movie game, this one is nowhere near as bad, or I guess a more fitting description would be, Batman Forever is far more playable, and I guess as a result, is more fun, though saying either of those things is generous. This game still sucks. Batman Forever for the SNES was released in the summer of 1995 to coincide with the release of the film, the third in the original Warner Bros. Batman series, and the first to be directed by Joel Schumacher. The game was developed by Probe Entertainment and published by Acclaim, the same duo behind the Batman and Robin movie license game, which I have already had the pleasure of reviewing on the channel, if you want to check it out. Batman Forever loosely follows the events of the film, having you go up against the combined forces of Two-Face and the Riddler, the latter of which designing a brainwave device that extracts confidential information from all the minds in Gotham City. Level 1 sees former District Attorney Harvey Dent, now known as Two-Face, escape from Arkham Asylum, and it's up to Batman to subdue the inmate riot that results from it. This whole sequence draws from a deleted scene from the film, which depicted Two-Face escaping Arkham and even writing a message to Batman in blood on the wall. It was something they adapted into the official Batman Forever comic, which I reviewed on the channel as well. Anyways, moving on. Level 2 has Two-Face attack the second bank of Gotham to steal pension funds, and he holds the security guards hostage, which you must rescue. Level 3 takes place at the Gotham Charity Circus within the Hippodrome. Two-Face and his gang have planted various explosives, and you must get to them within the time limit, finding small clocks placed throughout the level to extend your time. After the circus, Level 4 has Batman track Two-Face down to his warehouse hideout, culminating in a battle against his two henchwomen, Sugar and Spice, as well as Two-Face himself. He drops from the rafters like the Phantom of the Opera, flips his coin, and even flips his entire body. Who in their right mind thought giving Two-Face a backflip as an attack was a good idea? I don't remember seeing him do that in the movie. Then again, these same game developers gave Mr. Freeze a cartwheel, so why am I even questioning their logic? Level 5 is at the Ritz Gotham Ballroom, which is being attacked by Two-Face's gang, aided by a new gang dressed in green question marks. It's here where you come face to face with the Riddler for the first time, who has the ability of materializing Mexican wrestlers on a whim. After you defeat the villains, you chase them through the Gotham subway, and even fight a bunch of them on a moving train, which is pretty cool. It's at this point that the Two-Face and Riddler gangs break into Wayne Manor, having found out the identity of Batman thanks to Edward Nygma's new box. They infiltrate the Batcave and even kidnap Bruce Wayne's girlfriend and psychiatrist, Dr. Chase Meridian. Following this, the Dark Knight then prepares for a final showdown against the Riddler on Claw Island. He infiltrates his fortress hideout, goes up against hologram versions of the villain, has another confrontation with Two-Face, and finishes everything off against a giant muscled-up Riddler clad in white, named the Big Riddle. Once he's defeated, Batman rescues Dr. Meridian, and all of Gotham is finally safe. Batman Forever. Aw man, is that cringy. On paper, all of this sounds pretty decent, a solid adaptation of the film with a few interesting new ideas thrown into the mix. I think this game would have been okay, passable, if not for one fatal flaw, the gameplay. If you're familiar with the Mortal Kombat games on the Super Nintendo, primarily Mortal Kombat 2, which was also published by Acclaim, then it doesn't take long to realize that they stripped all of the same combat animations from it for use in Batman Forever. It utilizes the same game engine. Now, all of this doesn't sound that bad, it's just punches and kicks. What could be so wrong with that? It's not like they don't suit Batman, they're the same types of moves he would be doing against criminals. But that's not really the issue here. The issue is how slow and tedious it makes everything, how tiresome playing Batman Forever becomes. Just because this type of combat system works in a game like Mortal Kombat, doesn't mean it works here. In Mortal Kombat, you have one opponent to focus on, one person to take out, deplete their health meters and move on, simple as that. Here, you're going up against like 20 or 30 guys in a stage, it feels like, and while their health meters aren't as big as a character's in Mortal Kombat, it still doesn't mean it's fast or easy to get through. When you're swarmed by multiple enemies that surround you on either side, you feel at a disadvantage and you become ganged up on. It's unfair. Your attacks are pretty slow, so turning things around in your favor can sometimes be tricky, especially in later stages when the difficulty of each guy is ridiculous. Every single one that appears becomes a chore, and you're guaranteed to lose several lives by the end of it. That's if you survive and don't game over, that is. Mortal Kombat features fatalities and countless flashy and colorful moves to keep you engaged, but imagine if you played it and could only use your basic attack buttons. That's what it feels like here. Batman Forever isn't necessarily boring, but it does drag on. It's monotonous, mind-numbing, especially in those later stages when progression seems to take an eternity. Now, there are gadgets that can be used in this game during combat, but none of them felt really useful to me, and they take specific button combinations to perform, so why bother? When you play this game for an hour or so, your fingers begin to hurt, at least mine do. The thought of adding more presses to that equation makes me want to cry. Batman Forever doesn't really make much of an attempt to get you to use gadgets anyways. It pushes for the combat side of the gameplay more than anything. The only gadget you really need to use is the grapnel gun, to swing over pitfalls or raise yourself to a higher level. That's it. There are special gadgets you can acquire by exchanging hidden blueprints for them before missions. Some are found in hidden areas of levels you get to by solving riddles. These riddles are just rhyming clues, and honestly, a lot more could have been done with them in this game. Was this the best utilization of riddles they could come up with? It's kind of disappointing. I'm not wasting my time solving each one just to get more gadgets I won't end up using. On top of the slow combat system, other issues poke their head out to piss you off, like the classic foreground elements in some of the levels that block your view of enemies. That's always fun. I hate this shit. Such a pain in the ass. Some of the question mark guys also throw these floppy black portal things that Batman will fall through temporarily. I don't know what the fuck is going on, but these guys are the worst. So annoying. Every enemy you encounter in the game has their own unique name, a simple way to make it feel like they are all different people and not just the same select sprites used over and over again. Some of the names are what you'd expect, like Frankie, Alfonso, Charlie, Ricky, Stuart, that sort of thing. But some are just plain weird. Pringle, Slim Jim, Bloodfire, Cannibal, Dark Seed, Antifreeze? Who the hell names their kid Antifreeze? And what about Tricky D? Is that short form for Tricky Dick? Let's quickly talk about the loading times in this game, because, well, they kinda suck. You have the infamous hold on message that appears every time you exit a screen, and while it doesn't last that long, it pops up very frequently, which is kind of annoying, especially when you're inadvertently punched back into a loading screen by enemies. It wouldn't be Batman Forever without the inclusion of Robin, and he's playable here. He looks nothing like he does in the film, and the game makes no reference to the death of his family, but it's still nice to have a bit of variety with who you can play as, because we know damn well there isn't any variety with the gameplay. He has different combat animations than Batman, and even uses a staff, which is pretty cool. That wasn't in the movie. His grapple-up animation is goofy though, makes him look fat. Outside of the story mode, which is lackluster and frustrating in and of itself, there really isn't much else this game offers. There isn't that much replayability, even compared to other Super Nintendo superhero games I've played. There is a training mode where you can play as various characters from the game and hone your skills in a virtual Batcave simulation, but it's just fighting enemies, the same shit you do in the normal game mode. You play multiple rounds against the opponents of your choice, and they get harder and harder with each defeat. I can get to level 9 before they start kicking my ass, but the sad thing is, I think that's even easier than the difficulty found in the final story mode stage. Christ. All in all, I think there is some charm to the Batman Forever game on SNES. There are a few interesting ideas attempted with it. In spurts, it can be kind of fun to play, I'm not gonna lie. But when you're playing it for hours on end, the gameplay is what kills it. It's very repetitive, and the whole experience becomes exhausting. Like I said, by the time I completed it from start to finish, my fingies were sore. It felt like they were gonna blister. Batman Forever is one of the worst Batman games, but I don't think it's a complete disaster. It's far more playable and enjoyable than Batman and Robin on PS1 was, speaking from experience. The combat is its real crutch, though. Acclaim made the wrong decision taking it right out of Mortal Kombat. It just doesn't fit this kind of game. If Batman Forever had a different combat system, one that was more laid back and had you take out enemies in a few quick hits or something, more of a beat-em-up style, then they might have had something with it. Well, that about does it for this review. If you've played it, let me know what you thought of Batman Forever on the Super Nintendo in the comments section down below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit that subscribe button, bell icon to be notified of all future content I release, and share the video to anyone you know who loves this kind of stuff. It's much appreciated. If you want to suggest a superhero, comic book, or anime-related video game for me to review on the channel, head on over to patreon.com/channelNerdgasm and help support my content financially if you can. Any bit helps and keeps the YouTube dream alive. I thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Take care. Playing Batman Forever on the Super Nintendo, a game I have already discussed on my channel before, is like eating a piece of shit with chocolate chips mixed into it. Sure, it's not gonna taste good going down, but hey, at least it's got a few elements you love in it, right? Batman? How about gameplay stripped right out of Mortal Kombat 2, since the publisher Acclaim lazily recycled the same game engine they had used for the home console ports of Midway's legendary 2D fighter. Batman Forever, released on the SNES in 1995, is a pretty bad Batman game. It's not the worst I've played, but the combat in it just doesn't suit the style of platformer beat-em-up the game is aspiring to be. Enemies can take forever to defeat the farther you get into it. The game becomes so repetitive and physically tiring on the hands by the end that I wouldn't recommend playing it in its entirety in one sitting. That's what cheat codes are for. Contrary to what many may believe, it wasn't the only video game tie-in Batman Forever received, just the one that has gotten the most attention online over the years. There was another in 1996 for the arcade, which was later ported to the Sega Saturn and Sony's original PlayStation. Batman Forever, the arcade game, is an entirely different beast from its 16-bit counterpart. Unfortunately, it was still published by our friends at Acclaim, so don't get too excited. Batman Forever, the arcade game, is a side-scrolling beat-em-up that allows you to play as either Batman or Robin, and does offer a two-player cooperative mode. Robin's costume is much more screen accurate than the one found in the SNES game, but Batman's isn't. On the character selection screen he looks fine, but once the game begins, you'll notice he has a large yellow bat symbol on his chest. It looks more like one you'd see on an action figure, and I think the reason it was made so large was to help him stand out from a lot of the dark backgrounds and the enemies that have a similar color palette. The combat in Batman Forever is fairly satisfying with hard-hitting combos. Enemies will frequently fly towards the screen and slam into it. You can pick up various gadgets, like the taser, batarangs, and grapnel gun, which can be used against enemies. And before each stage, you get to select a modifier to use, like increased damage or having duplicates of yourself for a limited time, for example. Collect enough bat symbols dropped by enemies to fill the purple meter under your health to power up and make your attack stronger. Batman Forever is really flashy and can be quite fun, but the novelty of all the eye candy wears off rather quickly, and it just becomes mindless. I think its gameplay is more tolerable in the long run when compared to the 16-bit version of the game, but it's tedious and mind-numbing all the same. The biggest problem I have with it is the frequent, seizure-inducing screen flashes it uses, with a lot of its combos and special moves. I get that it's an arcade game first and foremost. It was doing this to lure the children towards it and take their quarters, but playing on home consoles gets really overwhelming in areas, putting you in sensory overload. Do yourself a favor. If you ever go to play this game, make sure you do it with the lights on, and even then, you'll probably still have a headache afterwards. There really isn't much of a story to speak of in Batman Forever. It loosely follows the events of the film, but its presentation knocks it down a few pegs compared to the SNES version. In that game, you get to see a map of Gotham that Batman is traversing, either in the Batmobile or Batboat, to his next destination, and read a bit of story text to fill you in on what's going on before each level. Here, it's just a flashy arcade brawler, where you go from one stage to the next. There isn't any real substance to it, connective tissue. The locations at least follow those from the film, though. You start out on the city streets, fighting your way on top of a building where the vault being carried by Two-Face's helicopter is repeatedly dropped on you. Batman crashes the party at the Ritz Gotham nightclub and chases Two-Face and his goons through the abandoned subway tunnels and into the villain's hideout, taking on his two henchwomen, Sugar and Spice. You battle the Neon Gang in the back alleys and face off with their leader, the one who was giving Dick Grayson issues in the film after he took the Batmobile out for a joyride. Never knew his name was Tassel, though. The Dark Knight then defends the Batcave from intruders, an army of criminals hired by Two-Face and the Riddler, with most of his equipment and gadgets badly damaged, and is confronted by the large monarch bat that was featured in a deleted scene cut from the film. Honestly, this is a really awesome inclusion on the part of the developers. And then you have a final climactic encounter with Two-Face, Riddler, and their henchmen in the control room on Claw Island that constantly spins and changes direction. It's a neat effect that disorients you while playing. Many of the levels in this game, especially the ones that take place on the streets of Gotham and in its subway tunnels, bleed together. While colorful at times, I don't think there is as much variety to them as the other Batman Forever game that I looked at. It doesn't even have a stage set at the circus, which is a shame. There are a few new enemy types, Two-Face's masked goons, Neon Gang members, and Riddler robots, but even they are not enough to prevent this game and its environments from becoming boring after a while. Two-Face and Riddler will pop up occasionally in a few of the levels, attacking you from the foreground or background, which is cool, but disappointingly, the only boss battle you have against them is against Two-Face in the control room at the end, after destroying the Riddler's brain device. That's it. Nigma can be seen in the background, standing on top of his throne platform in the center, but you never actually get your hands on him in the game. Batman never squared off against him in the movie either, but this is a video game. Let us live out that fantasy. Even the 16-bit version of Batman Forever let us, giving Riddler two forms even, a heavily muscled Big Riddle and then his regular-sized self, powered down to close off the game. Batman Forever, the arcade game, is just okay. It's got better graphics than its 16-bit version, and adapts a few more ideas not seen in that one, but I would consider the other game to be a more accurate representation of the live-action film, and dare I say, a bit more satisfying to play too. Don't get me wrong, my fingers bleed when I try to complete that one. It's unnecessarily long, and the recycled combat from Mortal Kombat 2 does not work within it, but at least it offers far more story context, a few more interesting boss battles, and has a level select you can access with cheat codes. I prefer the SNES version, though both Batman Forever games are not the most ideal to play from the Caped Crusaders video game library. Choose a bunch of others instead. I want to thank you all for watching this video, and I hope you found it entertaining or insightful in some way. If you'd like to support the channel and ensure the future of its content, you can do so by becoming a subscriber, hitting that bell icon for notifications, or by joining my Patreon for as little as $1 per month. I will see you all in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and always stay nerdy. Batman and Robin was released for the PlayStation 1 in the summer of 1998. It was developed by Probe Entertainment and published by Acclaim. Batman and Robin was the video game tie-in for the 1997 movie of the same name, directed by Joel Schumacher. Much like the film, it was a critical and commercial failure, and it's not hard to see why. It didn't help that this game came out a full year after the movie hit theaters. So, audiences had plenty of time to know what they were getting into based off the quality of the film, and simply didn't buy it. For this reason, Batman and Robin sales were dead on arrival, and all the effort Acclaim put into the title was essentially a waste of time, even if they were contractually obligated to complete it. It was originally intended to come out a month or so after the film, which made the most sense, but I assume its delay was due to Acclaim forgetting about the project or having too much on their plate at the time to get it done on schedule. It probably came down to their own incompetence and carelessness in some way, in all honesty. But just because the year-long negative word of mouth towards the film would have been a major contributing factor to this game bombing in sales, doesn't mean Batman and Robin was incapable of becoming a diamond in the rough. It could soar to new heights and stand on its own from the movie, right? Well, you would be if you were living in a dream world. The reality is, well, it's batshit. Now I have to give it some credit because Batman and Robin is pretty faithful to its film counterpart. The locations in the game look fairly accurate to the ones in the movie. The Gotham Museum, snowy cones, botanical gardens, the Turkish baths, that big statue with its arm out, even the Gotham Observatory at the end with the telescope. They even managed to throw in some new locations as well, like Axis Chemicals and Arkham Asylum, that were either briefly shown or mentioned in the film with the heroes absent, or were featured in previous installments of the franchise. The game's story takes place over the course of 3 days, or I guess, more fittingly, 3 nights. That's right, take it Batman Arkham, we've got 3 nights to contest with here, not just 1. Stick that up your pipe and smoke it. Anyways, the events of the game loosely follow those of the film. You go up against Mr. Freeze and his hockey thugs, and prevent them from stealing diamonds all over Gotham, ending with you beating the villain, destroying his freezing engine, and incarcerating him at Arkham Asylum. Then you must combat with the likes of Poison Ivy and Bane with their army of zombies and spiders, okay? Who plan on covering the city with plants using chemicals, or polluting the water supply or some shit. It's not explained very well. The final night has Mr. Freeze escape from Arkham, freeze the city, and it's up to Batman to stop him once and for all. Once you do, you simply throw the necklace that his wife Nora wore in the film on the ground in front of him, and he gives you those liquid vials. But instead of it housing the cure for McGregor's syndrome to save Alfred like it does in the film, here it helps melt the city somehow, or at least that's what the cutscene makes it out to look like. There are references to McGregor's syndrome in the game, Freeze's wife Nora, and even her necklace, but nothing involving Alfred or connecting any of this stuff together in any way, like that Nora has that disease and Freeze is trying to cure it, stuff like that. I mean, some of the clues might specify this, some I didn't find, but I feel the developers rely on the player having seen the movie first, which means they can throw a lot of that information under the rug. It's kind of lazy. So yeah, the game is loosely based off the film and hits a lot of the main beats with its locations. The final day even has Batman in his ice armor like he had at the end of the film, which is pretty cool. Mind you, if it weren't for the pre-rendered cutscenes sprinkled in throughout, you'd be kind of lost with what's actually happening. They're the backbone of this game's narrative storytelling, because everything else gameplay-wise feels very shallow, repetitive, and lacks focus. The game doesn't really move the plot along that much with its gameplay. All that mainly just happens at the beginning and end of each day, with a simple cutscene or text on screen to tell you what's going on. That's it. Batman and Robin plays like no other superhero game I have ever played before. Most of the story events don't trigger by themselves like basically every other game in existence. You don't go from point A to point B with things just happening and changing as you progress. It's not scripted in that way. Here, certain events, such as a jewelry store robbery, will happen at a specific time, and you need to find enough clues to figure out what the villains are planning, when, and where. If you aren't at the right location at the right time and miss the event, then the villains win, and it's game over. Each day has a specific list of these events at different locations throughout the city, and every time you play, the order in which they can occur may vary. Sometimes you may arrive at a location early, and a cutscene that is supposed to happen doesn't. At this point, you have to open up your menus in advance time until it does. To collect clues and other useful items, you can defeat enemies or find them out in the city, which can then be pieced together at the Bat Computer to figure out your next course of action. Honestly, the clue finding and putting all of the ones you've collected together to uncover the villain's schemes is kind of cool, and makes you feel like a real detective, just like Batman. With that said, some of the clues make the villains look pretty dumb, having their plans blatantly obvious and easy to figure out. Not to mention, these criminals just drop vital information like that? Who let them hold on to it to begin with? Stupid. While I enjoy some of the detective elements and the real-time events are an interesting idea on paper, they overcomplicate everything and are completely unnecessary. This game should have just been level-based, or had its story events occur in linear fashion. That would have been fine. Then again, it shouldn't have been based off Batman and Robin to begin with either, but here we are. Countless times throughout my playthrough, I found myself struggling to find enough clues because they're scattered all over the place. It led to many dead ends and wasted time, forcing me to reload my save. This whole system just doesn't work as well as Probe had probably envisioned. I found myself needing to skim through walkthroughs at certain points, which was a challenge in and of itself. Apart from the odd gameplay on YouTube, no one has really taken the time to write up an in-depth FAQ or anything like that, and I don't blame them. No one bought this fucking game, except me. Now? What in God's name was I thinking? I love Batman and superheroes. I guess I like punishing myself with the artifacts of the past. Anyways, one of the biggest aspects of this game that I feel doesn't get enough credit is the fact that you have a massive open-world Gotham to explore. I mean, you aren't gliding off rooftops or anything like in the Arkham games, but it's still pretty damn huge for PS1 standards. I would even go so far as saying it's too huge, unnecessarily so. To make traversing Gotham easier, this game has a fully drivable Batmobile, which is something else I believe it doesn't get enough praise for. This was 17 years before we got the Batmobile in Arkham Knight, and I have to say, it's pretty damn impressive seeing it in a PS1 game like this, not to mention to this extent. That said, it's a bit of a clunky mess. Anyone who bitches about the Batmobile in Arkham Knight should play this game for 10 minutes. It'll shut them up in a hurry. It is fun driving it, I will admit, and visually it looks great, but its control is both slippery and stiff, if that makes any sense. Turning corners is just awkward, and its long shape makes turning around damn near impossible because many of the streets in Gotham are made so narrow. Surprisingly, it appears to be equipped with a machine gun too, which allows you to blow up other cars, whether they are civilian or criminal. I feel like I'm playing Twisted Metal with all these explosions popping up around me. What happened to Batman's no-killing rule? And here I thought Clooney was the only live-action Batman that didn't get his hands covered in blood. I guess I was wrong. Mr. Freeze's thugs are relentless in their assault on the roads and are constantly colliding with you and become really annoying really fast. There are endless waves of them and you can't go more than 10 seconds of silence before more of them show up. They swarm you, shoot freeze blasts which slow you down, and even perform pit maneuvers that spin the Batmobile right around. It's even worse on day 3 with the Bat Hammer because it's lighter and you get tossed around like nothing. I hate it. Your only means of fighting back is with a machine gun, but it drains your power cell meter, which you need to repair your vehicle, and besides, they keep coming anyways, so why bother? Speaking of Gotham again, it looks decent at first, but the longer you play this game, the more you realize how similar everything looks. All the buildings, street layouts, use of color, it all looks the same, which not only makes Gotham feel rather dull and depressing, but navigation confusing at times. All the streets, shown on the minimap in the bottom right, are so small and squished that it's hard to make out. You never know if you're right beside where you're supposed to be, or one street over. It's irritating. You constantly have to keep opening up the map to check where you are, and on day 3, it manages to become even worse. Not only does the city look even shittier, blanketed with snow and ice, God is it ugly to look at, but the mini-map is damn near invisible at that point, making it impossible to see where the hell you are going at any given time. This is PS1, and I admit that the open-world Gotham and the drivable Batmobile were very ambitious for the time, kudos to the developers, but they forgot to make this sandbox fun to play in, which is why it's rather forgettable in the long run. Again, I praise them for attempting all this, especially at the time, but the technical limitations do hold back a lot of these ideas, unfortunately. Early 3D games like this one have not aged very well, and it's not hard to see why. Now I should mention that you have the option to play as both Robin and Batgirl for the entirety of this game's duration as well, able to switch between them at any time in the Batcave. You also get to drive their respective vehicles, both motorcycles. They play the same as Batman, apart from different punch-and-kick animations and character-specific stats. Robin is acrobatic and can jump higher, whereas Batgirl is faster at moving as well as dying. The thought of beating the entire game with Batgirl and her weak-ass attacks and lower health makes me sick to my stomach. I want to throw up. Okay, so let's discuss the worst aspect of this game, bar none. The controls are complete garbage, and that's being generous. Let me try to explain this shit to you. In order to walk or run, you don't just move in the direction you want to go and build up speed like most other games. No, that'd be too easy. You have to cycle between a walking and running mode by pressing R2, which is awkward enough on its own. But adding to that, you also have to cycle between a combat and detective mode with L2. So if you need to interact with something like a switch or button, use gadgets, jump, hell, even heal by double tapping circle, if you have a red power cell in your inventory, you have to be in the detective mode. If you get swarmed by enemies, however, and need to fight back, you won't be able to use any of your attacks until you press L2 and switch to the combat mode. This means that you will almost always take a few hits from enemies if they take you off guard. It's really frustrating. It doesn't help matters that the damage you take from enemies is quite a lot, and you can die within seconds if you aren't careful. Enemies seem to block way too much as well, and there is no option to change difficulties. This game is a hard son of a bitch at times. Enemies just seem to keep coming and pop up where you least expect them to. You're bled white without much health pickups in some areas, and when you die and game over, you have to load your most recent save, which is usually at the Batcave. This means you have to exit the Batcomputer again and wait for the loading screen, run over to the Batmobile, watch a quick cinematic that you can thankfully skip, wait through another load screen, drive all the way back to the scene of the crime, which can take forever, bumping into walls and endless cars, trying to run you off the road, wait through another loading screen, advance time so the crime can actually begin, and finally you can try beating the event again. And if you die, well, God fucking damn it. Anyways, juggling all 4 of these modes with L2 and R2 and switching them out constantly to do different things is a huge pain in the ass. It becomes second nature after a while, but that doesn't justify this overcomplicated control scheme. I get that they might have had to implement the walking and running modes. Due to the PS1 controller only having a D-pad, it would have made things awkward, but they could have at least assigned the attacks to the square and triangle buttons and threw in a few combos that way. Not to mention, allow you to perform attacks at any time, not make you switch to a separate fighting mode to do so. It's annoying. Square could have also been the interact button too, and circle the way you throw batarangs, smoke pellets, and heal. Stuff like that. The control scheme they went with in this game is way too cumbersome for its own good, and brings the enjoyment level down in a big way. It should have been made much more simple, especially if kids were gonna play it. Okay, so the combat system found in Batman and Robin is a joke. You don't have many moves at your disposal, but even if they included 5,000, it wouldn't matter. Your attacks are useless, and the only one with any bit of power is the axe kick. You'll find yourself using it for the entire game, over and over and over again. I'm dead serious. Even the bosses will play the exact same way as a regular combat encounter, that is if you want to win. You have to spam this axe kick, or you will get your ass handed to you on a silver platter. Bane, Mr. Freeze, Poison Ivy, they can all end you within seconds if you fuck around too much. Speaking of the bosses, there is nothing to say here. Again, they all play the same. It's Axe Kick City, bitch. Mr. Freeze's model looks terrible, as if a little kid was dressed up as him or something, with goofy gloves and Arnold Schwarzenegger's face plastered onto a mask. His proportions are all out of whack. All he does is say voice clips from the film and grunt and groan while you kick him. It's actually quite funny. Sometimes he even cartwheels, for no rhyme or reason. I guess it's a dodge or something, but an odd choice to put in the game. I don't remember him doing that in the film. I will say that his freeze gun does do a lot of damage though, so you want to keep the distance between you and him at a minimum. Bane and Poison Ivy are kind of cool because you fight them simultaneously on top of the GCPD building, and later in the Turkish baths around that shallow pool. Much like Freeze, Bane looks like shit. He walks around like a bumbling idiot and his stance and posture is just silly. I hate Bane. He's a miserable boss to fight because he seems to always block and he does so much damage it isn't even funny. I usually have to throw a smoke bomb down or something just to have an edge against him. With Poison Ivy, her health goes down faster than all the others, which is great, makes her easy. Problem is, if she lands any of those blown kisses on you, she charms you for a few seconds and you are unable to attack. It's fucking annoying. The final battle of the game takes place at the Gotham Observatory and has you take on Mr. Freeze and Bane. One can hit you from a distance with their freeze gun, and the other does crazy damage up close. Fun stuff. Batman and Robin is surprisingly one of the hardest games I've ever played. I can't stress that enough. You always feel like you're at a disadvantage with it. Despite all the gadgets in Batman's arsenal, one wrong move or enemy flanking you can result in a quick and painful death. And the fact that you have to wade through all these loading screens just to try again can be frustrating. Your enemies just deal way too much damage, and if it weren't for those red healing cells, which can be scarce unless you know where to look, this game would be impossible to complete. The controls and combat found in Batman and Robin are trash, and they take a bit of time to get used to, especially when you factor in the use of gadgets and everything. But once you get a feel for them and adapt to their shittiness, this game is far from unplayable, despite its difficulty. It's definitely one of the worst Batman games I've played, hell, one of the worst superhero games, but that's mainly in part due to the terrible controls, lackluster and ineffective combat system, fixed camera angles that change automatically depending on which way Batman is facing, as well as how dark this game looks in general. Even with the brightness turned all the way up in the options, you can still barely see what you're doing at times. I had to turn the brightness all the way up on my TV in order to beat the Arkham Asylum level, and even then it was still difficult to see where the hell I was jumping at times. I mean, look at this capture. This is what it was like with the game's brightness turned all the way up. You can't see a damn thing. You're blind as a bat. And yes, that pun was intended. God damn it. Honestly, I like the detective elements in this game that have you piece together clues to figure out where to go next. It feels very Batman-like, but unfortunately, it's not enough to save this mainly negative gaming experience. I hate that the game takes place in real time, which was completely unnecessary and overcomplicates the entire narrative. You always feel constricted in this open sandbox because you don't want to waste too much time getting to the next crime or event, fearing another game over. But the game tells you that clues are found by defeating enemies and exploring the city, which you need to do at times to progress if you are low on them, which happens a lot. Not to mention, if you want to improve your character's stats, you need to find and defeat gang members within Gotham as well. All of this seems way too counterintuitive, don't you think? How can I find the time to do all of that when I don't really have any of it to begin with? Batman and Robin on PS1 deserves a lot of the hate it receives. It's not a very good game. All the issues I mentioned in this review hold it back in a big way. I will stress though that the drivable Batmobile, open-world Gotham, and fully explorable Batcave were very ambitious for the time, especially on this hardware. Many elements were probably the inspiration for later things we saw in the Arkham franchise too. Honestly, if this game's combat and controls were improved, and if the story followed a more linear and scripted path, it would have been fairly decent, or at least better than it had any right to be. But I don't want to praise this game too much, because it wasn't very fun beating it for this review. It had its moments, but I don't plan on ever beating it again and putting myself through all that shit. It was torture. This has been NerdGasm. If you enjoyed the review, be sure to hit that subscribe button and bell icon to be notified of all future content I release. Share the video to anyone you think might enjoy it, and help support everything it is that I do on patreon.com/channel NerdGasm to make videos like these possible. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Take care.